Kia ora koutou, my name is Natasha Gardiner. I am an environmental advisor at Antarctica, New Zealand, and I work on the Policy, Environment and Safety team. I've been leading the biosecurity initiatives at the organisation for the past year or so, but there are plenty of others who are also heavily involved in the biosecurity surveillance program, and throughout this video you'll be meeting a select few of those people. So I'm very excited to be sharing with you today how we've gone about biosecurity from the very beginning up until the now and again into the future and what we're looking at doing. So welcome on board and I hope you enjoy the video.
Antarctica's biodiversity and intrinsic values are at risk from the introduction of non-native species, predominantly facilitated by the human activity. The Antarctic Treaty Parties have been aware of this issue since as early as 1964, when they agreed the measures for the conservation of flora and fauna. In the 1990s, when the Environmental Protocol was agreed, Annex 2 includes specific provisions for the introduction of non-native species. Increased pressures on Antarctic ecosystems more recently through increased human activity and climate change have caused the Committee for Environmental Protection to recognize non-native species as a priority topic. The committee has developed and revised and updated a non-native species manual. It includes guiding principles as well as practical implementation and management measures that national Antarctic programs can use to mitigate the risk of introduced non-native species. The committee has also recognized non-native species as a high priority topic in its 5-year work plan, and the subsidiary group for climate change response also has a work plan around non-native species. New Zealand, as an island nation, has a long history and is well known the impacts of introduced species and exotic pests onto its native ecosystem. Antarctica New Zealand has worked with Biosecurity New Zealand to help develop its biosecurity system.
So our biosecurity program is founded on those same principles outlined in the non-native species manual that the Committee for Environmental Protection has put together, and that is prevention, monitoring and response. Antarctica New Zealand surveillance program began in the 2005-2006 season when we had a large incursion of Drosophilid flies in beverage packaging. Now that just happened to occur in the same year that they had a Committee for Environmental Protection non-native species workshop here in Christchurch, which was quite a timely event for us because the next year we had a similar and larger incursion of the same flies at Scott Base. So since that year we've put in place much more stringent measures, and since then as well that event has been known to be an exceptional incursion. But we now have a trapping system all around Scott Base and our staff are trained to report on incidents that occur, which means that we have a very large long-term data set of up to nearly 2 decades now of non-native species data. As you can see here, invertebrates at Scott Base have been more commonly detected than other organic non-native materials and organisms over the past 14 years. This could partly be explained to how easy it is to detect invertebrates as opposed to other non-native organic materials such as soils, moulds and fungi. Over the past 14 years, 252 invertebrates have been reported at Scott Base. Flies are the most commonly occurring. During that time, at least 14 orders and 51 families have been represented by a minimum of 68 different species. In comparison to colonisation and propagular pressure in other regions of the globe, these levels are considered to be low. They are also lower when compared to invertebrate introductions recorded by surveys elsewhere in Antarctica. The transportation of food to Scott Base remains the highest risk pathway for introductions. There are 2 main risk pathways for transferring non-native species throughout our operations. The first is intercontinental transfer, which is between Antarctica and New Zealand, and then we have intracontinental, which is within regions in Antarctica. Our biosecurity group here at Antarctica New Zealand works very closely with the Department of Conservation and the Ministry for Primary Industries, and we've undertaken numerous risk assessments for these pathways, and we have now implemented many measures to mitigate those risks identified.
We reduce the risk of introducing non-native species to Antarctica through our procurement practices. So we have a list of approved suppliers who understand our requirements and need to stick by them. And then we also have a list of approved and banned fresh fruit and vegetables. So the ones that are approved are ones that are not likely to have any soils or insects in with them when we send them to Scott Base.
Before anyone travels to Antarctica, they must submit an environmental impact assessment, This EIA includes an identification of biosecurity risks and the measures they will use to control those risks. Before staff travel to Scott Base to work for the season, they receive 2 weeks of training in Christchurch. This training includes biosecurity. For example, the winter chef is fully trained as the Scott Base biosecurity officer, and they will manage any non-native species incident on site. Other key staff, such as the field support team and the cargo handlers, also receive specific training on biosecurity.
Everyone that heads down to Scott Base through to Antarctica comes through this facility for the New Zealand contingent, and we provide them all the clothing which has been dry cleaned, cleaned and inspected to ensure that it meets all biosecurity measures. This is basically so that it reduces any risk of contamination being taken to Antarctica. This is our Antarctic New Zealand transitional facility. All of our containers that are sent to Antarctica, before they're loaded, they are inspected externally and then cleaned on the inside, and just prior to loading them up, we actually spray them with an insecticide to remove any insects, any spider webs, etc., so that when we send the containers to Antarctica, they meet our biosecurity standards, and then they are inspected again once they arrive in Antarctica. Yeah, so we have our fresh fruit and vegetables come in from our approved suppliers. They do their checks. We then bring it into the warehouse area where we do a secondary check, and this is to check it to make sure that there is no bugs or soil attached to any of the product. Then it is packed away in the cubas and sent to Antarctica, where the next check is done when it's booked into Scott Base by the staff down there.
All scientists heading out to the field must have cleaned all their equipment prior to their trip. All gear is cleaned between field trips and when events return to Scott Base, including their camping tents and equipment. All are thoroughly cleaned here at the HFC. Antarctica, New Zealand has banned all poultry products from field events working close to bird colonies. This is to reduce the risk of spreading avian pathogens to Antarctic wildlife.
When cargo arrives here in the Hillary Field Centre, we undertake a full biosecurity inspection with fly spray on hand. There's also insect traps located around the HFC to attract any insects that may escape. When fresh food arrives here at Scott Base, we do a thorough check of all items for any non-native species, including insects and soil. We have a checklist to follow and fly spray on hand. Anything is found. It's easy to contain here in the fridge, and we have a UV light at the back to attract any flying insects. When we do find a non-native species, we catch it, contain it, and send it back to New Zealand for identification by the Ministry for Primary Industries. We also log an incident report for anything we find.
We have insect traps located around the base in our highest risk areas. For example, we have insect traps here in the wastewater treatment plant because other stations in Antarctica have had incursions in their plants in the past. We also don't allow biological materials from guano from other biogeographic regions to go through our wastewater treatment plant. We dispose of this waste via the biohazardous stream that returns to New Zealand by shipping container.
The Scott Base redevelopment project is a great opportunity to build a station with fit-for-purpose biosecurity containment facilities. It also provides the opportunity to recreate process and policy, which we have developed in collaboration with experts from other New Zealand government agencies. Biosecurity has been considered in the design of the new Scott Base, with a separation of inter- and intracontinental cargo pathways. There are dedicated clean spaces provided for the inspection, cleaning and disposal of non-native species.
So hopefully this video has demonstrated to you that we already do quite a lot in terms of biosecurity here at Antarctica, New Zealand, but with the rebuild of Scott Base coming up, we are keen to be able to develop our program and do a lot more in terms of mitigating the risks. You may have also realised throughout this video that our program is heavily focused on the intercontinental transfer of non-native species, and that's because we actually know a lot less about the intracontinental transfer. So we would like to take more of a risk-based approach, fill those knowledge gaps and put the right controls in place to mitigate the risk of transferring species within Antarctica, and that's a piece of work that is currently ongoing.
Thank you for joining us on this whirlwind tour of biosecurity at Antarctica, New Zealand. We would really appreciate any feedback, advice or comments from both the science or policy communities, as well as other national Antarctic programs. Ngā mihi nui.